it's my pleasure to have a platform here both to show Firooz Zahedi's work, which I saw at Craig Cool Gallery about 2 years ago, and fell in love with immediately and wanted to do something more with it. And Firooz very kindly showed me his work, and we put the show together, and it's been a very great pleasure. The work is really cuts to a lot of very, very significant issues around representation and identity, but I'm not going to bore you by that because I'm going to let Firooz talk, and Firooz has said to me that I get to ask one question, and then he's going to do the rest of the talking, and we will talk for maybe 40 minutes or 30 minutes, or until he runs, but I don't think the well's going to run dry, but at a certain point I'm going to just ask people in the audience to ask questions as well. So my one question for Firooz is, how did you become an artist?
How did I become an artist? Has everybody seen these enough? Because I don't want to subject you to constantly have to look at them. If you want, we can switch them off. At some point, would you mind switching them off? Thanks.
Okay.
It's
so
distracting because it's nothing to do with this.
So in 2 or 3 minutes, yes, you would just turn them down. Okay.
How did I become an artist? Ever since I was a little kid, I could draw, I could paint. I liked being creative. I liked to, be an artist, I guess. But in a very innocent way. It's not like, oh, I'm going to become a famous artist. And I come from a family, a very conservative family, and they were very powerful in the previous Iranian. You can't hear me? My wife can't hear me. That's the first time you said I can't hear me. Okay, here we go. Is that better? Okay. It's want to stay up. Hold on. Let's go up here. Okay, any good? Good? Okay. So, very conservative, macho family in the military, in the government. And so when I was very little, they didn't really pay much attention to me. But after a few years, I would say things to my father that I like to be an artist, and he was like, no, you don't want to be an artist, you got to be, real man job, blah, blah, blah. So I sort of suppressed it, and I just continued drawing for myself. And I realized after a certain point of being rejected in that way that it wasn't enough to be just an artist. You had to be famous because that way you could prove to the people who don't take you seriously that you're an artist. They will respect you. So I followed the directions of what they wanted me to do. I went to the school they wanted me to go to. I went to a college they wanted me to go to. I became a diplomat for a while and did all the stuff my family wanted me to do. And then I got to a point I couldn't do it anymore. I resigned and I went to an art school in Washington, D.C., the Corcoran School of Art. And I was in heaven at that point because I was being creative. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. And I didn't pay any attention to the concept of, having to become famous. The reason I'm talking about fame is because this show is about fame, people who are famous, and with this process I did on the film, I took away their identity, and I gave their identity to the film. I made the film the star of the image, as opposed to the celebrity who was the star initially, because fame doesn't last forever. And this was my way of proving that, in that, you're not going to be famous forever. So when I decided to just go back to school and be, creative, take art courses, I was very happy. But at the same time, there was something in the back of my head because my dad kept saying, well, what are you going to do with this degree? You're going to get a job, blah, blah, blah. So I realized I still have to prove myself. And to prove yourself, you have to become famous. And it was not easy becoming famous as an artist, but I was very fortunate in that I got to know Andy Warhol through a friend of mine, and I worked with him. So I became famous through association. Like people would know that I'm friends with Warhol, so they would want to know me. But it had nothing to do with my own work. But I took advantage of that. I said, hey, why not? And then I became very good friends with Elizabeth Taylor, and she was a dear friend and a mentor, and she did a lot for me in my career. And again, people wanted to know me because I knew Elizabeth Taylor. Then Elizabeth Taylor brought me to Los Angeles as her photographer. And I had to start at the bottom again, because without Elizabeth Taylor, I was just nobody again. So with the help of my first wife, who was a journalist, I got work at the LA Times doing small shoots. And then I sort of built up a little bit here, a little bit there, and started doing fashion catalogs, anything to, make some money. And I was still working with Andy Warhol's Interview magazine, doing shoots for them. And at one point, I sort of felt like, okay, I'm back to where I wanted to be, in that I'm being creative, I'm making enough money to pay the bills. I was still young enough not to think of the far, far future. And I said, I'm happy just being creative and making enough money to pay the bills. And then one of my photographs in Interview magazine was seen by the photo editor of Vanity Fair. So they called me up and gave me a small assignment. They liked that, they gave me another one, and another one, and another one, and assignments got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then one day they called me to New York, flew me there first class, said, we want to give you a contract. I thought, my God, Vanity Fair, blah, blah, this is great. So I signed a contract with them, and I was on the masthead with Helmut Newton, Annie Leibovitz, and Herb Ritz. And I thought, this is something, quite impressive. But at the same time, I didn't feel comfortable with the whole becoming famous thing, It still wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted to be creative and do what I wanted to do. But I now was doing creative stuff and getting a lot of money. But now it was much more like, well, you got to do this again because we like this photo, stay in this direction. And after years of, doing things to please others, I suddenly realized I wasn't happy. I wanted to go back and just be creative the way I wanted to be. So I started doing more fine art photography and creating things for myself. And I got a few exhibitions in LA with flower images I'd done, nudes I'd done, and then years later, a friend of mine who is the curator of Middle East art at LACMA, I was meeting with her, with my friend Yassi there. We went to meet her, and she wanted to do something to create a council of people to support Middle Eastern art, contemporary Middle Eastern art. And at the end, she said, I'm looking to do a photo exhibition to do with Iran prior to the revolution of 1979. And I hadn't been to Iran since I was a kid. My parents moved to England, so I grew up there. And then I came to America. So I said, the only time I went there with a camera was in 1976 with Elizabeth Taylor, and I have a bunch of photos of that. But I thought, that's not something a museum would want. She said, well, let me see them. So I sent them to her. She really liked them. They gave me an exhibition at LACMA, and it was sort of ironic, Here I was thinking, if I ever get a museum show, I want it to be nothing to do with famous people. And I got a show at LACMA with one of the most famous people in the world. So I wasn't going to say no to it, and it was very nice to get it. And then I just wanted to produce more fine artwork, and I was getting weary of working with celebrities. It was like, factory work, really. So I found one of the slides I had shot back in the early 80s of a fashion model for an ad. And I found that it had been somewhat destroyed by moisture, and the colors had all merged together, but it looked amazing. So I took a bunch of photos of celebrities not photographs, but slides, 35 millimeter slides. And I put water on them, Windex, whatever chemical liquids I could find, I poured on them, put them in plastic bags, and once in a while I go back and look at them. And then when it got to the point where the faces were not identifiable, but you still get the essence of there's somebody there. But what became more prominent at that point was what the film had done, what was in the film that took over. And that became the more impressive part of the image. So at that point, I got them scanned and printed. That's the only digital thing, because I hate digital. That's the only thing digital that took place. Otherwise, this is my sort of homage to film, which is a dying art, you know. Everyone's doing digital now, and you can manipulate so easily with digital that anybody can do it. You just sit there, blah, 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 you know. But with film, when I was shooting film, when I was doing portraits, with digital, you know, you take a really ugly photo of someone, and you go and you can Photoshop and make them look superb. With film, you better get it right on the film. You can do some retouching, but you don't have the same amount of opportunities as you would with digital work. So this, to me, I'm proud of it because it has very little to do with what's going on now with digital photography. And also, you know, you take these faces, you can hardly see who they are. There's a little hint of who they are, but they're really not as important as the colors and the abstraction that's taken over. I also did another show where I took celebrities, famous actresses that I'd photographed in that room. I think you might have seen Sandra Bullock, Uma Thurman, and Drew Barrymore. And I made them the background to quotes from film noirs, which just sort of is more important, that quote, than I think. The image is like secondary. So that's what happened there.
So a question, where did you learn to be, two questions really, and you can answer either or both. Where did you learn to become a photographer, and where did you learn about Hollywood photography? Because Hollywood photography is different from Hollywood film. I mean, they're really, photographing is a different thing than filming. So if you could talk about that difference and how you came to it.
Back in the 70s, I became very interested in old Hollywood photographs, like some of the stuff you have on that wall. People like George Hurrell, Clarence Sinclair Bull, a whole bunch of them, you know, Willoughby, all these people. And I started getting books of their works because I was doing portrait work for Interview magazine and some other publications. And I just totally admired the perfection of those photographs. They were so perfect. You know, they were taken 8x10 cameras and with, you know, tungsten lights. You know, you didn't have the strobes. You couldn't shoot a whole roll of film and then edit it down to the one you want. You know, you probably took 4 or 5 images and you had to get it right. And then the retouching process they used was like art, you know, etching and airbrushing and all that. So totally fascinated by that. And I wanted to do work like that. So when I came to LA and I started in the beginning, I was like trying to duplicate that kind of work. And I always loved movies, especially old movies, film noirs, you know, anything from the, I mean, I think a lot of us here love old movies. So that was my obsession at that point, and that's what I looked at those images to learn from them. I took one course, or 2 courses at the Corcoran in printing black and white images, but it was more like fine art photography, not commercial and portrait work. I never assisted anyone. I never knew much about technical stuff. And when I got to LA, I mean, I always used a 35 millimeter camera with available light, daylight, whatever. And then when I got to LA and I started learning a little bit on my own about using strobes, I had 1 power pack and 1 strobe, and that's how I started. You know, I was doing these small shoots that sort of started building up. And at one point, when I was making halfway decent money, I got an assistant. And I've never been good with the technical side of stuff. I have an eye. And I'm not trying to be big-headed about it, but that's, you know, I can see something and I can make it look good. But I don't have the technical know-how that a lot of these assistants do. A lot of assistants are more obsessed with technicality than they are with getting the image. I mean, I did a course at the Santa Fe photo workshop thing. And all they wanted to ask me was, all these people who were like making fortune doing, what do you call those business catalogs and school photos of kids. You know, those guys make amounts, huge amounts of money. And, but they all wanted to become like celebrity photographers. So they all came and took my course. And there was this one guy who kept prodding me and asking me, so, you know, how can I be like you? How can I get to photograph this? How can I be like you? And I finally got fed up. I said, you know what? You can't be me because there's only me. You don't have my eye. You need your own eye. So you better try and be you. Don't try and be me. I mean, that's what it boils down to, you know. I have an eye for a certain way. I photograph a certain way. And I was fortunate. I studied diplomacy and I was a diplomat. So I was very at ease dealing with celebrities. I could charm them to do things. I mean, it got to a point later on when I think I did some shots with some celebrities, you know, topless, but, you know, covering themselves. Actresses would walk in the studio and just take off their tops. You know, it wasn't like I would ask them. And, okay, you know, I wasn't going to say no. But people expect things from me. And that sort of becomes like, okay, you know, I want to move on, do something else. So technically, I was always reliant on really great assistants to help me, and they knew it, and I never hid it, that it's all my work. I always thanked them, and I always told people, you know, these are the guys who are setting up the lights for me. But I would tell them, you know, I want the light here, I want that there. But they would all plug everything in. But I remember, you know, in the beginning, I had one power pack, one light, and I would schlep that around and, you know, plug it in myself. That was the limit of my knowledge. But then, you know, I started having 3 assistants, 4 assistants, and they would bring all these, you know, equipment, lighting equipment. And I remember there was a studio in LA a lot of us used called Smashbox Studios, and, you know, there'd be like 3, 4 studios, and Leibovitz would be in one, and I don't know, Michel Comte would be in one, and Patrick de Marchelier would be in one, and I'd be in another. And there was all this competition amongst the assistants more than the photographers, like who's working with who's got more equipment. And, you know, one of my assistants would come and say, you know, Annie Leibovitz got all the lights that you wanted. I said, okay, I'll use the sunlight. And I did a lot of my work. I just took the celebrities outside, and I put a silk up, and I just shot them with available light. It was what I learned in the beginning, and I just went back to the beginning. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself in any other way. But, you know, I loved working with celebrities in the beginning. No, it was exciting. I loved movies, so I would work with a celebrity. I'd ask them about, you know, the projects that we're working on, or say, you know, I loved your such and such movie, and, you know, start a conversation, make them feel good, and that would get me to a point where when I photographed them, they would be comfortable. But it reminded me of when I first met Elizabeth Taylor, and she was someone I met through my cousin who was ambassador in Washington, and they were dating. So he had asked me to help look after her, and although I was no longer a diplomat and I was an art student, I said, I'm not going to turn this down, you know, looking after Elizabeth Taylor. So he went off for some business thing to New York, and he said to me, I want you to look after Elizabeth Taylor for dinner tonight. She was staying at the residence of the ambassador. So I thought, my God, you know, a tete-a-tete dinner with Elizabeth Taylor, how exciting. And I thought, you know, what can I talk to her about? And I said, so, you know, what was it like doing this movie? What was it like doing that? And she sort of would answer a little bit, talking about, but she was so fed up with movies at that point. It was a turning point in her life. She was in her mid-40s, and back in the 70s, an actress in her mid-40s was finished, basically, even Elizabeth Taylor. So she was getting like not great movie parts, and she was doing them to make money, but she was weary of making movies. So she, I said to her, gosh, this is so exciting. I'd love to go to Hollywood and be involved with making movies. And she said to me, you don't want to do that. And I didn't understand at that point what she meant. But years later, when I was working with Hollywood, I realized what she meant. It gets really tedious, and it's not as exciting. And I don't want to discourage anyone here who wants to be involved with doing celebrity photos or making movies. For me, it just wore away. And so I just started doing what I wanted to do, and I sort of pulled away, and I was no longer part of that whole celebrity photographer scene. Didn't bother me. I was very happy just doing what I wanted to do. And I just have two things, I wrote down, and there's my friend Cheryl, just arrived. Hi, Cheryl. A super celebrity sitting there. I don't know if you remember the movie Fame. So I just wrote down a few lines from the song. It said, I'm gonna live forever. I'm gonna learn how to fly high. I feel it coming together. People will see me and cry fame. Baby, remember, remember, remember my name. Do you remember the name of the actress who sang that? There you go, I rest my case. But I want to quote another person here, a celebrity who I worked with several times, beautiful lady who was a supermodel, Andie MacDowell. I worked a lot with her. You probably know her from Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, Four Weddings and a Funeral, a bunch of other movies. Groundhog Day. The film expert there, my wife. So there was they interviewed her for the New York Times a couple of weeks ago for the Sunday section. And she became super famous as an actress, first as a model, then an actress. And then she sort of like withdrew and dealt with her own life, her family. And then she said this, she said, people tell me I'm not relevant anymore, blah, blah, blah. But who wants to be relevant? It's a lot of work to stay in that place forever. I've never wanted to be relevant. All I ever wanted to be was for someone to take me seriously. And for me, thank you, Bruce, for taking me seriously.
Yeah. A pleasure. So I had one specific question, and then I'll turn it over to all of you. And I'd like to talk about the nudes.
The nudes.
Because when I first thought of the exhibition, I was thinking very specifically of the celebrity work, of this relationship between image making, celebrity, and all the work that Firooz has gone through to dismantle these images and dismantle the celebrity. And the nudes are not celebrity images. And so I was reluctant to include them. But Firooz convinced me to, so I want to hear you talk about that.
So those nudes were from a show I had back in like 1999. They were shot as nudes. I was trying to be like everybody else, do nude photography. And I did those actually most of them 35 millimeter film. And I had a show at G. Ray Hawkins Gallery in Washington, in Los Angeles. And I put them aside. Then I showed them actually again at Staley Weiss Gallery in New York. And then I sort of lost interest in doing that. And when I was revisiting my work for these things, I sort of looked at the news and I said, okay, shall I destroy these? And then I thought I wanted to do something a little different with them. I had these pieces of lucite, like very old pieces of lucite cubes and squares that were used for displays in a jewelry store to put like rings and whatever on. And I bought a whole pile of them because they looked interesting. And I did an exhibition actually with those lucite that was at the Polka-Pagan Gallery. So I took the lucites and I put them on top of these proof sheets of the nudes. And the way the images got distorted and the scratch marks from the lucites, I just took my camera and put it right on top. And I took those photos. And it just was interesting. Nothing profound.
Well, but you also said to me that, and this is what convinced me of how they connected to these other images, was the willingness and eagerness of these models.
Fame,
and that's to do with fame.
Yeah. So you get to a point that you're known, and I mean, I said it a little earlier. I mean, an actress would walk in, and you know, I didn't have to say much, and they would take their top off, you know. And if you're famous enough, you can say, take your clothes off. If you're a famous photographer, say, take your clothes off, I want to take a photo of you. And a lot of models would do that. Some actresses would do that. And it's a power thing you have, which you can abuse, which I think certain photographers right now are regretting having abused, because our Me Too movement has sort of, you know, got rid of them. So, you know, it's that abuse of fame or power that you can get by doing the nudes. Because they'll do things for you, because you have that, you know, reputation of fame or being a good photographer or whatever.
So, so the issue of power and power of images and power of fame gets really interestingly complicated in these works.
But there again, you know, you go back to the whole thing of, I'm not going to name those photographers because I know some of them, great guys actually, but they screwed up. They sort of took advantage of their position and did things that really upset certain models and people that they worked with, and, you know, sexually. And so, you know, that is something that is the negative part of fame that goes beyond just photography. I mean, what fame gets you is like, you can get, when the Beatles were super famous, well, they are still super famous, but in the beginning when they became super famous, John Lennon went and said, we're more famous than Jesus, which made middle America take the records and burn them. You know, I mean, not everybody got it as in a subtle way, you know, they took it very literally. And you can have someone like the gentleman who's running our country right now say, I can go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and kill someone and nobody will do anything to me. So there's that negative part of fame that people they abuse and they take advantage of. And then you have the fame that comes with, in today's world, with social media. I mean, you know, Andy made a whole remark about everyone in the future will have 15 minutes of fame. And they are. Everybody's having 15 minutes of fame. I wish the Kardashians would no longer have that 15 minutes, you know, get it over with, but they're still getting it. You have people like the Kardashians, or people who are on Instagram getting like hundreds of thousands of followers. But who should be famous? I mean, you know, somebody who does good, in my opinion, someone who is good at what they do or who does good deserves, qualifies for fame, in my opinion, who don't abuse it, you know. But if you take the fame that comes your way through a reality show or something minor you've done or something not good that you've done, I think it's like not good at all to you know, that's the ugly side of fame. I mean, Hitler is famous, but, you know, who wants to deal with Hitler, you know?
Agreed. Yeah. So one last question, and that is, what are you working on now? You have a book that is just about to come out.
I'm glad you asked that question. I have a book. I'm trying to do as much as I can that I get joy out of before I kick the bucket. So I did a book that I photographed all of last summer. It's coming out in October. It's called City of Angels. It's a book of photographs of great homes in Los Angeles, about 27 great homes, architectural homes, people like Lautner, Neutra, Lloyd Wright, Ed Fickett, a bunch of other ones I forget. And great art collectors, great homes with art questions. And so I was very excited to do that because I like to do interiors, I like to do architecture. And believe it or not, after that comes out and goes, I'm going to do a book of my portraits because this lady over here keeps nagging me to do it, my wife. She said, if I don't do it, I'm in trouble. But you know what? I've done nice portraits, and I think I might as well put a book out there, not for the fame side of it, but just as a record of the work I've done.
And a selection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. My Jewish wife. So a couple of years ago, I had a book out on Elizabeth Taylor. And
I'm going to get the book.
Okay. It's heavy. I have to drag it.
It's a big book.
It's a big book. They're both big books. Okay. So this, some of you may have it already. It's my book. I hate the cover, but the publisher is responsible for that. It's a book of 35 years of friendship and with stories, little stories. There we are at the White House with the Clintons. That's her wearing her famous Versace jacket for a perfume promotion. That's her on the farm in Middleburg. All sorts of stuff. That was on the set of Little Night Music. So I'll hand you this so I can get the other one. And, ooh, God, I'm getting too old for this. This is the book. I only have this one copy, otherwise I would have done a book signing today. So this is the book I've got coming out, The Homes in LA. And so October, it comes out early October. If you're in Los Angeles, we're doing a book signing at the Joel Chen store on Highland Avenue, 1000 Highland Avenue, on the 20th, which is a Saturday. And if you're up here, we're going to do a signing on 10th of December at, what's it called? Hudson, Grace and Hudson, Hudson and Grace, in Lower Village, Montecito. So
Good.
that's that.
Okay. So
Questions?
Questions.
No questions? Great.
Oh, there's a question.
I have a question. So, a lot of these photographs you say are famous people, and you distorted their faces.
Mm-hmm.
Are they still alive, and what's their reaction?
Are they still alive? Quite frankly, I don't know where they are anymore. I wouldn't know. I know the whole reason is like for you not to know who they are. I know one of them, few of them are alive, yeah. I know a few of them who are alive, yeah.
And would they like what you've done?
I don't know. As I said, it's not about them anymore. It's about how fame comes and goes. And I'm not trying to demean them. I'm not trying to put them down or anything. But, you know, it's none of us will be remembered forever. I mean, maybe a handful. Jesus. So I don't know, you know. Fame, you tell me, what do you think of fame? Did my dad ever recognize you establishing yourself as an artist? I'm happy to say he did, because I was very well established, and I was photographing people he knew, like Elizabeth Taylor, and in fact he came to LA once to stay with me with my mom, and both of them came from London, and right at that time, I had an assignment to photograph James Stewart, who was from his era. So I said, Dad, gotta leave you, I gotta go photograph James Stewart. He was very impressed. But they were very impressed. And my mom kept all the magazines and everything that I shot covers for. And she used to come, you know, and tell all her friends. And so they were proud of me in the end, yeah.
And a question there.
Yeah.
And hiring other people for that. But with some of the newer work, are you interested in the new processes? So sort of because you're not, I'm assuming when you're talking about using chemicals and different things in a Ziploc bag, that's you doing that, right?
This is me, yeah, this is me. Sorry, did I shout there? Yeah, this is all me.
That kind of newer process of manipulation?
But this is not like setting up lights and doing all that plugging in. I wouldn't know what to plug into what anymore, you know, in all honesty. But I tell you, I had one assistant who I used all the time, nice guy, and he was Iranian too, actually, and very polite, and he knew a lot of stuff, you know, technically. And then Helmut Newton asked me when he was in LA, he couldn't find his regular assistant. He said, I need an assistant. So I introduced him to my guy, and he started working with Helmut all the time, and Helmut loved him. He would take him to dinner, introduce him to all the celebrities. And so because we both worked for Vanity Fair, the Vanity Fair photo department got to know about this assistant. And they had some minor shoots to be done. And they gave him a small shoot to do, which is what they originally gave me, a small shoot to do. So he comes to me and says, I got this shoot from Vanity Fair, excited, and what am I going to do, I said, they chose you to do it. You go there, be full of confidence. You tell whoever it is you're photographing, you sit here, you do this, you do that. You know what you're doing. Don't get nervous. Don't let them push you around. Don't follow their directions, because once they start directing you, then they're going to feel like you don't know what you're doing, and that's the end of you. So I gave him all the best information I could, and he screwed up. He totally fell into the trap of being controlled by the publicist, by the celebrity, and nobody really liked the photo, and he didn't get many other assignments from it. But I have one other example of that was Columbia Pictures did this movie with Streisand and Nick Nolte called Prince of Tides. And they called me in and they said, we want you to go to New York and do a whole day's session with Streisand, and we need publicity photos to promote the film. We got to give it to this magazine, this newspaper, because Streisand wasn't going to sit separately, one day for this magazine, one day for that magazine. So the studio was just going to do a whole day shoot and then just give for free the images. They would pay me a lot of money, but they would give it for free to the magazines. So I go to New York, and just before I went, the lady who had hired me at Columbia said to me, don't let her take over the direction, because then you're screwed. So I go, and I go one day before the shoot to have tea with her at an apartment and get to know her, and we chat, and very nice. And then the next day I go with my assistants, and we set up the lights. This was with film, pre-digital. So you take a Polaroid before you shoot film, and you show everybody the Polaroid. Are you liking this? You like your hair? You like your makeup? You like the lighting? If the hair has to be adjusted, or the makeup, or the clothing, whatever. So I showed her the Polaroid, and she said, well, and she was still is, a total control freak. So she started telling me how to relight it. I said, no, go with my lighting, trust me. And I forced her to go with my lighting. We started in the morning. She wouldn't let me stop shooting till like the sun went down, it was nighttime. And I think I did like 10, 12 setups with her. I was exhausted, but I just kept going, and she loved it. And for years after that, I did album covers with her. I did her in Vegas for her shows. I did her for magazine covers and stuff like that. So, we developed a great friendship because I wouldn't let her take over. That was one of the tricks. Anything else? No questions? I guess that's it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.